So you just spent a good amount of time making some games, but you couldn't save any of the data. You couldn't save any of the high scores. Your users didn't have accounts, and we all have played games, and we all know that an essential part of creating a good game is storing data, saving levels, saving stats, saving loot. Um, so this section is going to kind of look at that and ways we can do that in our programs. So if you want to save data in a game or just data in general, first thing you need to do is you need to have a place to save said data. So the easiest place to save data is in a text file, and so that's where we're going to start. Now, I don't want to just create a text file like I would using a computer before this course. I want to write code to create a text file because that is much more difficult, and why would I want to make things easy? Difficult for now, but easy in the future and along the lines. So here's my program. It has one button, and when I press this button, I want to create a text file. So the first thing you need to figure out is, where do you want to create this text file? In which location would you like to save your text file? So for me, I don't know. I'm going to save it in my Unit 5 folder. I'm going to save it right here. So what I like to do is, once I've found a location to save my file, is I'm going to click on the address bar up here. And I'm just going to Control-C, copy that. So that is the location of where I want to save this file. That is the directory. So what I can do is, underneath the partial, I'm going to create a string variable called file name. And I'm going to use this string to basically save the location of this file. So we all know that when you're creating a string, you put your stuff in these empty pair of quotations, and I'm just going to paste that location in, that file location. Now, depending on which version of Visual Studio you're running, when you paste that location of where you want to save your text file, it may automatically give you these double slashes, these double forward slashes. If it does, it's trying to help you out, and it's fine. However, I like to just work with single forward slashes. And you'll now notice I've got these red lines. All you have to do is put an @ symbol in front of it. So with the double slashes and without the @ symbol works fine. The single slashes with the @ symbol works fine as well. So those are two things you can do. We don't need to go into why. You just need to be aware of what Visual Studio is trying to do for you. So now that I have the location that I want to save this text file, I need to decide, what do I want my text file to be called? And depending on the situation, I'm just going to create a text file for some accounts I'm going to hold. So at the end of the string, I'm going to go another forward slash, and then I'm going to actually give my text file the desired name. So I'm going to say, I want you to create a text file called accounts. And the computer knows it's a text file because I'm going to go .txt at the end of it. And this is perfect. This should work just fine. So last video, we talked about functions. So when I click this create file button, I want to create a text file. So I'm going to do this in its own separate function. So I'm going to call it create file. And the code won't be too extravagant in this video, but it's a good habit to get into. So how do I create a file? There are too many ways to create a file in C#. And I'm going to show you a pretty low-level way, a pretty simple way, because we don't need all the bells and whistles. Let's just create a file. So all you need is one line of code to create a file, and it's going to look very similar to your sound player line of code. Except instead of sound player, we're going to be using StreamWriter. And StreamWriter is a tool that lets us create, edit, write, read files, all that stuff. So I'm going to go StreamWriter, and then I'm just going to give it an arbitrary name, SW, doesn't matter. And then much like the sound player, I'm going to say equals new StreamWriter. And in these parentheses, in these empty brackets, is basically the file that I want to create. And we have that up here in this string. I have the location and I have the name of the file and the type of file. So since that's all being stored in this string, I'm going to just use that string. And there we go. Now, just on the topic of functions from last video, you can see that this create file function is kind of not lit up. It's dim. That's because it's not being called. So I want to create the file when I click the button. So I'm going to call the function from the click of a button. So if I run my program now, and I open up the location where I want this file to be created, you can see that there is no file. And as soon as I press the button, boom, the file with the correct name is created, as well as, yeah. There's nothing in it. We'll learn how to add stuff to it later, but nevertheless, there is a text file that we have created with just one line of code. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is literally the most basic, simplest way to create a text file. We can jazz it up a little bit just to better our programming. For example, what if that file already existed? What if I had a bunch of accounts? I wouldn't want to create a new file and basically overwrite all of those existing accounts. So I should check if that file actually exists. How could I do that? Well, with an if statement. So if that file exists, I don't want to create a file. If it doesn't exist, I would like to create a file. So I can use the file class, and I can go file dot exists. So this will allow me to check if a certain file exists. And which file am I interested in? Well, it's the one here. It's the one being stored here with this name. So I'm going to check if file name exists. If it does exist, I don't want to create a new file. So in other words, I'm interested in if it does not exist. In other words, the else statement. So if it does not exist, I am going to create this new file. Now, it's not the best programming to just leave this first if statement empty. Even if I don't want to do anything, I should let myself or the user know in some capacity what's going on. So I'm going to go back to my design, and I am going to just bring in, my toolbox is gone. I'm going to bring in a label. And this label is going to say the file already exists. Label, I've already used error, so I'll use that. Turn the visibility off. So if the file exists, I don't need that. I will show this label. If it does not exist, I will hide the label and create the file. So let's run the program. I'm going to delete my accounts file. I'm going to have to do this quickly. Here we go. The file does not exist. I'm going to create file. The file exists. And I'm going to try to create the file again, and this time no file is created. All that has happened is this label is shown. Now the last thing, once I am done with this file, either creating it or reading it or writing to it, it is always good practice to close your StreamWriter. You can think of the StreamWriter as some active tool that is just waiting to either write or read to a file. And so once I am done, it is a good idea to close it. Say job is over, you don't need to wait anymore, just in case I want to do some stuff later. And if it hasn't been closed, well, we won't be able to access it in the future. So these are really the only 2 lines of code. And if you want to get fancy, you have now learned how to check if a file exists along with creating the file in the first place. So there we have it. There is creating a simple text file in C#.